to White Rabbit Podcast with Katillist Jones, where your reality might be challenged. So leave your feelings at the fucking door, and let's dive down some rabbit holes.
Liberal advisory. Truthful content.
Lizard Illuminati.
A secret reptilian democratic stronghold.
A new world order.
Wild. Sex slave.
Excuse me. Has anybody seen White Rabbit?
That was a joke about the world being flat, right?
Was it?
When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order.
They sound crazy, so who cares? But it could totally 100% be true because we know the government is lies about every single thing.
And welcome, fellow truthers and conspiracy junkies, to another episode of White Rabbit. I am your host, Katillist Jones. And man, the controversy around some of these topics that I've been having lately has been insane. So I wanted to cool it off a little bit, and I figured we'd dip our toes down under and pull something up. Drew Misson from Missing the Point, one of my most intelligent guests that I've ever had on the show, is here to break down one of culture's most, I don't know what you would call this, influential movie of like 2-3 generations. So, Drew Messon, what are we talking about today, brother?
Hey, mate. Geez, thanks to compliments, my head won't fit through the door, though. I don't know if I'm the most intelligent person, but I'm certainly one of the biggest Star Wars nerds, and that's what we're here to discuss today. The cultural phenomenon that is the Star Wars universe. And like you rightly said before, mate, it is something that has now gone through multiple generations, and we're starting to see people watch this with their grandkids, which is just something that's completely unheard of in cinema, that something can retain its staying power for so long.
It is something that I grew up with. I know that for sure. My daughter hasn't really got into it, but my dad and my brother, they will dress up in their Jedi gear and attend the openings of the movies. You know, they'll wait out in the cold with lines around the block, you know, in their garb and with their lightsabers and everything. I never myself did it, but I like to watch the movies, you know? And yeah, it's awesome to see something that can bring families together in a way that other things can't, because I know that like in certain families that I know, maybe even my own, there's certain things that will just destroy. I don't want to say destroy families, but if you don't really have anything that you can relate to with people, it's almost like that Star Wars is something that a lot of families have that gravitate them, that they can talk to about. Like football is that with some families, or baseball, whatever it may be. Star Wars seems to be something in the house that people talk about. But you do these breakdown shakedowns, and or is that Julia's thing? Is that your thing?
It's a bit of a collab with Julia and I, but yeah, she's the one, the mastermind behind that, and I've jumped in and value added where I could.
Awesome. But you do the Conspiracy Science Theater 3000, correct?
Yeah, Conspiracy Theater 3000. I'll do that with Moral Bob and Ryan Dean. But we've had a bit of a hiatus at the moment. We've got some busy stuff going on. But yeah, we do look at our films ourselves and look for the esoteric, the conspiratorial, all that fun stuff.
Love it. So that is what I was getting to, is you, I don't know if it was which one of those shows it was, but I was scrolling through Operation Red Pill so that I could catch up on their Bloodline saga that they've been doing. And I saw Star Wars, and then I saw Drew Messon right next to it. And I was like, no way. I haven't even listened to it, bro, because I wanted your take like fresh without having it listen to it twice over. So what is it? Is there like crazy conspiracies within Star Wars? I know there is, but is it like evil? Is it something we shouldn't be watching? Should I be ashamed to say that I like it? What's going on here?
Well, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, and Jason and Christopher do this really good approach to the satanic control matrix, where there's multiple layers that exist within films. And it's the same thing happens with Star Wars. On its face, Star Wars made by George Lucas, it retained a lot of the spaghetti Western style films of his youth. So it had this really great formula going on. It reminded you of the Western films of its time, mixed in with some Eastern kind of samurai films, and it brought this fresh new take to the American cinema. But what really took off is that it's this film that has the stereotypical tropes that you see in a hero's journey. You have the princess that needs saving. You have the Dark Lord has her captured. You have the pirate or the smuggler who's kind of the quasi bad guy / good guy at the same time, the anti-hero. And you have the unassuming knight or hero that takes up their place from being the commoner. So it has these generic elements that have pervade all of human history in our tales and our mythology, but there's something else that's core to it that draws us in. And I wouldn't say it's inherently evil or good. It just has this tale behind it and a sense of belonging that all humans seem to connect with somehow, regardless of where you're from on the planet.
Is it biblical?
There's elements which you can connect biblically, but I think that the greatest sense to it is the esoteric historical connections that come out more. There's definitely aspects which you can connect to Judea, to early biblical Hebrew culture, but there's definitely a mix of pre-Abrahamic religions that I think are its true overarching story.
Do you think that George Lucas was trying to convey esoteric messages through this, or was he just so juiced to be able to have spaceships flying through the air on camera?
Well, some of the names of the characters and the stories and the races and the things he connects and bridges into in this, that wasn't done purely as just good writing. He's connecting to this almost genetic memory that we all share as a human species, that there's this one culminating event or series of events that has stuck in our subconscious. And I think he's almost telling those stories, but with a new filter on it, a new lens. They tried it with Westerns. They tried it with the samurai films. And now he went into this new sci-fi type of arena with the same story, but the names and the faces were changed. And we don't know what it is about Star Wars. We can all identify and connect with certain characters, but there's almost a familiarity around it where there's something that draws us in and we love it and we're entrenched in the storyline. And it seems almost familiar. And you can't quite pin it down until you look at it a bit closer.
Do you know what it is? Or are we going to get into that tonight?
We definitely will be.
Awesome, brother. Well, where do we start, man? Because I think this is something that my audience is going to be excited to get into because, like I said, we've been going in some dark territories here lately. So I like to maybe not get so dark, and I figured this would be a good topic, hopefully.
Yeah, for sure. I think we'll start off with what's currently happening in cinema at the moment. We see Marvel and DC have been quite big for, say, the past 10 years, building up their thematic universe. And we have to look at that platform. And when you look at the likes of Marvel and superhero movies, they do a really good job of retelling the stories of Greek mythos, of the demigods, the titans, and the heroes of old. And that has such hook because it's something that exists within our recent memory. But George Lucas and Star Wars, they take it a step further. They go back far further than the Greeks ever did because Greek storytelling and Roman, Greco-Roman storytelling, that's borrowed from a much older and ancient culture called Zoroastrianism, which a lot of theologians and early historians would say is almost the overarching historical and ethnic context behind the Abrahamic religions.
So that's what I've heard along the roads of Star Wars is basically you can take every Star Wars movie and tie it in with a story from the Bible or an Abrahamic writing. And it's telling the same story over and over again. So to me, that just says if you have the right ties and you want to make a successful film, you just basically have to rebrand one of the stories in the Bible.
Yeah, well, what's the saying? There's nothing new under the sun, right? And I think we see that just in general with the hero's journey. But when you apply it to something as culturally and spiritually significant as the Abrahamic faith or Zoroastrianism, it's something that's the root and core story of all of humanity. So it manages to linger and it really connects with the people that are viewing it because we're seeing something that our ancestors most likely experienced themselves.
Yeah, I totally get that. Hey, Drew, we're similar in age. I'm not going to age you here. I think we're similar in age. When I was a kid, it always baffled me. One of the first things on the screen, it always says, in a galaxy, a long, long time ago, in a galaxy far away. And I could never comprehend that. I was like, how is that a long time ago when they clearly have things that is far superior to what we have now? And then the whole galaxy thing, I wasn't able to comprehend that at the time. I still can't because it's not real, but in my opinion. How did you feel about that as a kid? Like,
well, yeah, it had that juxtaposed position where it's a very long time ago, but they've got more advanced technology than what we've got. And it's almost a throwaway term to once upon a time there was. It has that fairy tale connotation with the opening scenes to it. But it's the connection we see now through adult lens and people who are in conspiracy theories and alternative history. There was a point within our own cultures where you could say that the technology or the knowledge that people held in the past was far greater than it is today. And you continue to make that connection. As a kid, it just seems weird because things are so advanced compared to what we had at the time.
Yeah. And I don't want to bring up Tartaria because I agree with a lot of people that I feel that was just a honeypot term. But if we do look into our history and see that a lot of these, especially just look no further than the World Fairs, that we did have technology that was far superior to what we have now that's been hidden from us. So it's really not that far off that in a long time ago, maybe not a galaxy far, far away, but, you know, a different civilization. I believe that we've gone through many resets, and we discussed that on the show a lot. And I'm kind of babbling here, but so where do we go from here, brother? Like, what is...
Well, I think for the majority of listeners, I don't think there'd be anyone out there who really hasn't seen Star Wars, or you would have seen it in passing. There seems to be two very big camps of people who are very addicted to it and people who have claim to have never seen it. But I think those people are just kind of shunning it as not seeing Star Wars as the new cool thing. Essentially, it tells the story of some Force users, which are the Jedi and the Sith, and they've had this ancestral blood feud or hatred for one another, the Jedi being the good guys, the Sith being the bad guys. But we have to look at the origins of some of these words and some of the templates and prototypes of which George Lucas has supplied these characters for the storyline. So the main one majority of people would know are the Jedi, these almost Roman era-esque monks that have this mix of Eastern samurai culture in amongst them, these warrior monks that use this divine power through the Force to achieve ultimate good throughout the universe. But when we look at the word Jedi, it's a clear takeaway from the Zoroastrian priest class called the Magi or the Magus, which over time, starting off in its Iranian culture, has since become magician or magic users. So we've got these pseudo wizards in space that are warriors at the same time trying to be the good guys in this situation. But I think it's a bit more nuanced than that, and they're not necessarily good guys when you look at the background and the moral code and the compass that they try to enforce within their world.
I would like to, maybe I'm wrong on this, but when I see things like that, I automatically go to witchcraft and occultism. And so, you know, when there's like extremely religious people that are super into this, that won't watch rated R movies, yet they're watching that, I would like to say that they're being saturated maybe with a more evil than they know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is where I come from. The gray area on this is that I won't not watch something because I know something's in it. I'm from the position of, if you don't know the tools or the methods of the enemy, how are you going to know that you're under control of them or being influenced? And it comes back to Ryan Dean saying all the time, sometimes you have to separate the art from the artist. And that's me as a person who loves Star Wars purely for the entertainment factor. I've grown up on it. I was a kid who was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s. I've had this my entire life. And this is something I'll probably watch with my kids as well. But there's a time of knowing what's in it and distancing yourself from that esoteric and the occultic that's in it and not letting it have power over you. I think if you know the tricks that are being played, you've got a bit more power over it than the saturation of it within the film.
Yeah, and I tend to think the same way, and that's why I get a little frustrated with some people that I know in my personal life that won't look into certain things because they think it's satanic, and that's kind of like the basis of red pill operation anyway, right? Is know what your enemy is so that you can exploit your enemy. And I completely agree with that. And I'm not saying that you should go watch porn or you should, go partake in like a satanic ceremony or something, but you could be partaking in a satanic ceremony if you don't know what that ceremony is and entails, right?
Exactly. And it's how far down the line do you go with that type of stuff? Because you could go down the route of the English language is an Enochian language, and just by speaking English, you're casting spells. So you're just going to stop speaking English for the rest of your life? Well, there's levels of nuance that you kind of have to go, okay, well, this is doable and this isn't. And you kind of have to plant your flag to where you think it's going to fit to be able to, integrate with society.
Right. Well, I always think that like in Hollywood, in Hollywood, in order for them to get funding for any type of a project or a film, they have to be able to push a certain overall message. And we know that they have layered messages within each film that is put out, and nothing is on accident. Everything is on purpose, every single still. And a lot of money goes into making these movies. And Star Wars probably has one of the biggest budgets ever. It's groundbreaking from the very beginning of them starting. So what if they're willing to throw this much money into it? What is this message that they're trying to push?
So on a surface level, I'd say you'd have to go to the cultural and the geopolitical implications before you even get into the spiritual. And you look at Star Wars, the way that George Lucas decided to make it, starting at episode 4 through to episode 6, halfway through the story. He didn't start at the beginning. It's a point in the Star Wars lore and history in which the Empire already exists, the big bad guys. They've conquered the galaxy. The good Jedi have been wiped out from existence with only a few survivors around. And there's a tyranny that exists over the galaxy. Now, when you look at the messaging of the characters, the plot line, the story, the uniforms, everything about it is very Nazi-esque. The uniforms of the officers are very reminiscent of the SS and the Luftwaffe pilots. You look at stormtroopers, literally taken from the SS stormtroopers, right? We've got this almost pseudo-Nazi socialist type of dystopian future. So much to the point where the majority of the cast in this film are all white, and the only colored people or people of diversity you see exist within the rebellion. So we wouldn't have noticed this in the past watching this, but it's almost planted the seeds into society that, government is always bad, whoever's in control is always bad, and you have to be the small person fighting the rebellion. And I think that's a way and a means of laying the framework for the groups like Black Lives Matter, for any types of extreme leftist political thinking groups, is it puts that position of the mainstream is always inherently evil. And sometimes the mainstream is either completely dubious to what's going on, useful idiots, or are just going about their business for political gain, finances, what have you. But it's really the higher echelons of power that are pulling the strings, and they ultimately control both sides anyway. They control the rebellious small offshoot groups as well as the bigger corporations and governments. And you kind of see that in the story of Star Wars anyway, in which the Emperor, from the start of the series, has manipulated a series of events in which he controls both armies fighting each other and ends up having the controlling stakes at the end, regardless of who was going to win.
Yeah, so they're basically just telling the story of the movie that is unfolding in front of us every single day.
It's the two-party system, and we don't realize it until you watch some of these deeper looks at Star Wars.
Right. And you did point out that it's both sides. And you also brought up Black Lives Matter as the underdog, but who also is underdogs is people like you and I, and we are rebelling right now. So we could argue that Star Wars created people like us in this movement.
Yeah, absolutely. And I hear this a lot because it's particularly iconic within American culture, but it goes across the whole planet at this point. And what a lot of foreigners point out is that Americans at this point in time, the Anglo-American Empire, are seen as world police, the people who bring democracy to the world. And to smaller nation states, third world countries that have been invaded by the United States military over the last 20 years, America looks like the empire. and they identify with the rebellion. They identify with Luke Skywalker and Han Solo. They are the small upstart scruffy nerf herders who are trying to fight this overarching power. And it's almost this position where Americans love this film, but the military industrial complex is the empire at this point in the game.
Yes, and you know, they visually they portray that as well too, because if you look at like the Empire and the stormtroopers and all of their equipment, it's almost like manufactured off of the lot type of a thing. And then you look at the rebellion stuff, it's almost like they were I don't know, scrapyard stuff, like when we first meet Anakin as a kid, and you know, and they're just fighting with the poorest of poor stuff against the big bad rebellion that has the most money and more resources than you can ever imagine. And that is exactly what we are living.
It's like a pre-telling of the American invasion of Afghanistan. You've got the Americans with the best gear, the best equipment, all uniform. No one has anything that's different from one another. It's baseline across the board. So there's no redundancy issues. And then you have a look at the Mujahideen and the smaller terrorist cells that existed in Afghanistan. They've got cobbled together pieces from ex-Soviet era, stuff that was given to them via the CIA when they were fighting the USSR. They're just literally the farmers and the people in the mountains fighting against unsurmountable odds.
In Star Wars, you talked about the casting, and there isn't really kids in the casting up until Empire Strikes Back, I think. Or is it up until the newer three, or not the newer? It would have been
the prequels, so the later ones from the 90s. That's so episode 1, 2, and 3, when we start to see young Anakin and the pre-story to what happened.
And Spielberg and Lucas are very good friends, right? And there's kind of something going around with Spielberg. Corey Feldman's come out talking about things that happen on Spielberg film sets, which I find ironic because isn't he doing the new Goonies movie with Spielberg?
Yeah, he's back. Glutton for punishment, apparently.
I guess, or they pulled him back into that MK Ultra room, and now he's playing by the rules again.
Yeah, they Clockwork Oranged him one more time.
Man, that guy is so weird. I would love to have him on and interview him, but at the same time, I can't take him seriously. But maybe that's just through the trauma that he's been through. I don't know. But when he goes up on stage, and he should just change his name to I Really, Really Wish I Was Michael Jackson, because the same haircut, he dresses the same. He attempts to dance the same. His music is horrendously funny. Sorry for going on a tangent about him, but I would love to talk to him because he attempted to spill the beans on the pedophilia that is happening. And it's just weird to me that Lucas and Spielberg, who put out these wholesome family movies, Cosby, are involved in these kind of things. Do you really see these things come through in the Star Wars movies?
Not so much in the originals. There's a level of it within Return of the Jedi in which we have the Ewoks, these lovable space teddy bears. A lot of those were played by little people, so dwarfs. But then at the same time, there were dwarf children who played those roles as well. So if anyone was going to be subject to nefarious things, it probably would have been those people on set. But nothing really stands out the likes of a Spielberg's E.T., Poltergeist, those types of films that we hear about in the conspiracy realm. Star Wars seemed in its heyday to be very much adult-orientated, adult types of themes that somehow just managed to blow up with kids all around the world. I think it probably had something to do with the casting, the amount of money that was paid, the filming locations around the world. If they had children as prominent roles within that film, it would have been a lot harder to achieve, but they certainly brought up into it in episodes 1, 2, and 3.
And in 1, 2, and 3. Well, no, 4, 5, and 6. I hate that he does that. Okay, 4, 5, and 6. Specifically in 4, nobody had ever seen graphics like that, like visuals like that before. So I could see that was just the hook that grabbed everybody right then and there. And then maybe those parents, like I said, I grew up with it, just passed that down. Like I wouldn't be a Raider fan if it wasn't for my parents. Why would I want to go through that like torture all the time? So, I can see that these things would be handed down. And I couldn't imagine just like, did you watch the making of it series that they have on, I want to say Amazon? I'm not sure. It's probably Disney, because Disney owns everything fucking Star Wars. Right? Sorry for cussing.
There's quite a few older documentaries. I'm not sure which one you're referring to, but I have seen a lot of the groundwork, the background scenes of how these films were achieved. And it's quite eye-opening, the fact that Lucas put so much of his money into, say, episode 5, which was Empire Strikes Back, and he made this huge deal about franchising the merchandise. That's where he made all his money. He was a broke man during the making of these films. But he managed to make a very good living out of the merchandising alone on this, and he knew what he was doing.
Yeah, I mean, the Star Wars toys were bigger than G.I. Joe when they came out. I remember going to my cousin's house, and he had like all of the toys, and I was, oh my gosh, because I wanted to go to his house just to play with his Star Wars toys, not necessarily him. And that's the impact that these toys had on people. I imagine that the originals are probably worth a fortune right now. Is everything okay?
Yeah, sorry. And I think this is where, if you're looking at it, say, at a very staunch biblical lens, you could say that by creating these characters and then the merchandise, and, kids have got these toys and these figures of these things, it's almost like idolatry. We're idolizing the characters. We've got small statues and figurines of them. And you see that now. There's people my age, and hey, I'm one of them. I have a huge amount of Star Wars collectibles. And then you have to ask yourself, well, how far does this go? Is this a form of idolatry, or is this just something that's a hobby? And that's the type of things you need to ask yourself. But bare minimum, it is a huge money-making machine. And, kudos to the guy for being able to merchandise all of that without actually having to pay for the film. That was a absolute genius move on his end.
Yeah, and I'm sure he made a lot of money merging with Disney as well. And unfortunately, Disney is one of the wokest of wokes out there. And not to mention, we won't even get into the other things that they're involved with. But speaking of wokeness, I don't know if this is true or not, but they're making all the newer stuff. And I hear that in one of the new ones, there is a lesbian Jedi that has a child from the Force.
Yeah, so the main theme behind all of Star Wars is it almost mirrors the birth of Christ, right? A powerful entity somehow is involved in the creation of a half-human who has these amazing abilities. He's the proxy position of Christ or the Antichrist, depending on what view you've got. And that was what was unique about it. It was all about Anakin or Darth Vader being the one prophesized in the Force to bring balance to everything. And that was what hooked a lot of people in. And then for this new series by Disney, in The Acolyte, they created a group of witches who are also Force users who managed to get together as a lesbian couple, and they created twins through the Force. And there's a good twin and a bad twin. So they're also mirroring this esoteric approach of Romulus and Remus from Roman and Greek type of mythologies, but they had to put that political spin on it. And that's where Star Wars was never inherently in-your-face political until Disney took over and they tried to inject a lot of that woke type of mentality, the woke mind virus into everything. And that is by far the worst rated series of Star Wars to date.
Oh, it's out already.
Yeah, it's come and gone, and it's been cancelled. They had this big setup for multiple seasons, and it tanked, and they're not going back for another season.
Good. That's what they get. And I hope that they get more slaps in the face like that and lose a lot of money, because it's one of those things that Disney likes to poison the well so much and take these things that used to be wholesome and then just bastardize them and throw it back at us. And, people were like, well, what's the big deal about making Ariel black? It was like, well, what if we took something that you grew up with, like as a hero? Like, how many redheaded princesses are there that, like the redheaded stepchild gets to look up to? And,
sorry, go for it, Brad.
Well, I'm just saying, like, what if we took one of your superheroes and turned it into a white person? Like, you'd be pretty upset about it, like, what is something I could say, but they don't have a lot of them. And I understand where they're coming from, but make your own. You guys are more creative than anybody else, because music is more creative. As soon as you guys were allowed to be able to hit the scene with your music, who knows what you were doing underneath, but all the white people that stole your music before, like, we're getting credit for it. Like, the most creative shit I've ever seen has come from my black friends. And yeah, I don't know where the fuck I was going with that. I just watched Matt Walsh's Am I Racist today, so that probably just...
Well, this is the psychological warfare that exists with Disney's approach of, for whatever reason, it always seems to be white ginger characters they replace and make them melanated people. You know, if you got the right actor, I suppose it's okay. But these stories aren't modern day stories. These are folk tales from Germanic Brothers Grimm or from Hans Christian Andersen. These are ingrained cultural stories of Western European nations. And you look at The Little Mermaid that you just mentioned, that's a Danish story. So it's naturally a red-headed mermaid. And when you change the cultural identity of these ingrained historical stories, it's a form of ethnocide. And ethnocide has been described as the precursor to genocide. You destroy a people's culture, you alienate them from their own history. It makes a people that's unwilling to defend their own position, their own nation, their own values. And that's the small goose step towards real genocides. It's not as in your front, as blatant as putting people on box cars or stacking bodies in the streets, but it's the start of that. And we're seeing this ethnocide via, Disney. We're seeing it in documentaries where the first Swedish people are now depicted as being dark-skinned people with blue eyes, which is blatantly false. It's not possible. You can tell that by the genetics and the bone structures of the first Swedes. It's this ethnocide that's occurring. And there's a great little quote that I'm going to go from Bartolome Clavero, who was a Spanish historian, who said, "Genocide kills people while ethnocide kills social cultures through the killing of individual souls." And so if you take the soul out of our stories, our ancient memory, it almost destroys us as individuals and a society. And we're seeing that being pumped out by Disney at the moment.
Not just Disney, but probably just America, anything coming out of America, I would say. I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it. We're seeing it in the NFL, like they're changing the Redskins to the Commanders. That's not necessarily pushing out the white people, but right now the white Christian male is their biggest enemy for some reason. And back to Star Wars. I'm sorry.
No, it all works here because you have to look at the multiple nuanced layers of this. And if we're to go back into the spiritual side of things, we have to look at some of the names of the characters that George Lucas used. I mentioned the Magi as being the precursor or the prototype for the Jedi. So magicians, mystics of the Near East. We look at Yoda, and now a lot of people know Yoda as this great little Jedi master who's the most powerful in the Force, is extremely old-lived, looks a little bit like a demonic little goblin. But a lot of people forget where the word Yoda comes from. And it's actually Hebrew in origin and includes his names, his origins, his speech. It all comes from Yodaya, which means knowledgeable, wise, or knows. So Yodaya in Hebrew means someone who's extremely well-versed, knowledgeable. So it makes sense for the character, right? He's either that's very good script writing by Lucas or he's deliberately telling us information. His speech is also eerily reminiscent of Hebrew and archaic Israelite language, where Yoda's speech, it sounds Hebrew in the written word. In Hebrew, verbs are often written first, followed by the subject and the direct object. So you would have heard Yoda say, "There is no do, there is must," and he just inflects his words the wrong way around. Doesn't make sense for modern day English, but it makes sense in the way that ancient Hebrew was written and read.
Do you think that Lucas went to a mystery school?
I'd say it's pretty plausible. His best friend growing up was, Spielberg. He's of the tribe. He was probably had, to my knowledge, George Lucas himself isn't Hebrew in origin, but he might have been connected to one of the Goyim schools of mysticism, say like a Masons or a Oddfellows or a Founders or something along those lines. But he has this real connection to Eastern, Proto-Iranic, and Turkic origins, which all the types of things you see in the Kabbalah and the Talmud. So he's got these connections to things that, as an average white American of his time, he shouldn't have had any knowledge of.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. And it was probably the making of that I brought up earlier. He spoke of a car accident that he had in Modesto, California, and Star Wars came to him when he was in a coma.
Sounds a lot like direct downloads, doesn't it?
It sounds exactly like that to me. And yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. So I know you like to dig in. Am I railroading which direction you're trying to take this?
Good. I like it. It's fine. Let's
okay.
Go.
I know you like to dive into names of characters and their meanings. And since we're talking about Yoda and his Luke Skywalker, is there anything interesting in that name and why picking that?
So a lot of people look at Luke Skywalker as being like a reference to angels or the fallen angels, because the Skywalker in its etymology literally means someone who walks upon the clouds, walks amongst the stars. And we could make the connection that's referencing angels or fallen angels. He was originally intended to be called Star Killer, which is, I think, even far more esoteric because it links back to the idea of the black sun. And we see that referenced with Luke's home planet of Tatooine. There's two suns there. Supposedly Earth at one point had two suns. We were a binary star system. Saturn was its own star before it went cold. So if he's a star killer, he's the one that has killed that second star. And if you look at the idea of the biblical analogies or the proto-Iranianic Zoroastrianism, there was a person who killed this dark entity. And you kind of get this feel with it with Luke, especially in his character progression, how he starts off as a farm boy, learns to use the magic or the force, fights his father, turns his father back to the good side, and is ultimately the one who's responsible for the death of the bad guy. And the Death Star in itself, a space station that can destroy planets and worlds. So you dig for it, you can find it. I find that this is where we tend to, I think everyone does it. If you look for something, you're going to find it. And to a degree, I think that exists in every kind of breakdown. But just the raw essence of the Abrahamic religions and traditions that have interwoven into this story, there's too many for it to be a coincidence.
Is there any other names that are notable that we might be able to pick out of any kind of occultic teachings, or like Luke being from the Bible? I mean, Princess Leia. I don't know any Leia that's like a god or anything like that, but I could be totally wrong.
No, it's more so the side adjacent characters. C-3PO just on his face seems to just be a robot with a designation. But when you look at him, he's this gold-adorned entity. It has artificial intelligence. It's not alive, so it's eternal in essence, and has the knowledge of over 10,000 different languages. He's almost the effigy that we see being given to the majority of actors today. And what is that statue, Brad? The statue that's given out, the gold statue, and you would know what that is?
It's an Oscar.
It's an Oscar, and the Oscar in itself is a relic or a homage to one of the gods of ancient Egypt, and the same thing, knowledge and power. And we see this within this one character. It's not as overt as some other films are, which directly tie the character name into the story and the progression of the character. It's the interwoven sprinkling of it that I find it makes it more of an Easter egg hunt opposed to other films that I've broke down in the past.
Do you think that Spielberg had knowledge of AI prior to making these films?
I'd say so, and I think we have to rethink what AI is. We know AI in the context of a data analysis, self-learning platform, but it's not true intelligence yet. And I often think when we have ideas of direct downloads, like George Lucas after his accident, it just came to him. And we have stories of the Akashic record where all the knowledge that has ever been and ever will be can be tapped in through meditation. I often think, what if things that are being connected to through the spiritual realm, through meditation, through psychedelics, whatever method people are attaining this, what if it's not necessarily an entity, but an ancient form of artificial intelligence that exists in the cloud or around us at all times? And that's what they're tapping into. A lot of people today equate AI as being the precursor to the Antichrist or demons, and they're just waiting for a physical body. Well, what if we're just rehashing what's already occurred, and through these multiple resets, the AI is still in existence. It's in the ethereal realm around us at all time via their version of the cloud. And people have just been accessing it via direct downloads and meditation for tens of thousands of years.
Did you see the video that I posted in the group chat where the guy took DMT and saw the code through the laser pointed at the wall? What did you think of that?
Wild. I wonder whether it's pre-suggestion of, and you mentioned in the group chat that he didn't tell any of his friends that they would see code or matrix in that. So I'll take him on his word on it. If he did tell them, it gives the air of doubt that he's pre-suggested what they would see, and that under the effects of psychotropic drugs, they see it because it's been planted. It'd be absolutely wild if it was completely on its face, exactly as he said, and that's how he managed to see the simulation. Because if it's something as simple as a psychedelic kind of lifts the veil so we can see what's truly around us, it's what we're seeing in a lot of predictive programming with films like The 13th Floor, The Matrix. These films have been telling us this for at least 20, 30 years now. So I wouldn't dismiss it offhand. I would just question whether he really hasn't told anyone. And I'd love to hear someone have a go at this without having the knowledge of the Matrix beforehand.
That would be impossible. And
because it's in the lexicon. It's in our knowledge of common culture now because of the Matrix. Everyone knows of it.
Right. And when I watched this, I was thinking, and I think Kyle brought it up, the question as well, is what happens if you use a blue laser or a green laser? Or was that you that asked that? Because it gives off a different frequency, right? And you said if you could just take this drug and see the Matrix, well, it was like, what are the chances of somebody taking this drug at the same time as pointing this frequency of a laser and seeing something? So I'm thinking maybe he could be onto something. But what sucks is I was like, I want to try this for myself, but the seed's already been planted. So I probably will see it no matter what.
Yeah, and if you go into a spiritual kind of realm on this, that we know colors have their own frequencies, but colors have their own representative meaning in the occult and the esoteric. A lot of people just associate red with being evil or the devil. And you see that replicated in Star Wars with the Sith all using red lightsabers, but the true color of the devil is actually green. Ironic that Luke Skywalker ends up getting a green lightsaber, but in this story of the gentleman using lasers, he uses a green laser to see those things. So what would it be if he used a blue laser or a red laser? Would it be completely different?
He used a red laser in that video, and now I got to change my whole fucking show, dude. Like my entire show is black and green. When I was reading the Aleister Crowley books, he said that the true colors of royalty are red, purple, and black. And if you are one of the chosen, you don't even see black. You see black as purple. And where does green come in? You broke my heart just now, bro.
If you look at it primarily comes from the East. So Indian, Zoroastrianism, green is seen as the true color of evil. Especially when which is odd that we haven't associated that in the Abrahamic appropriation of that knowledge, because modern day woo-woo and spiritualism is based on nature, right? And Gaia and the earth. And we know that as Christians, that's kind of code for, love thyself, love thy planet. It's the approach into some kind of a new age Satanism and one world order. And green is like the oldest religious association. Trees at one point were deified as gods. Then it became the man of the woods, who was a green man covered in leaves and bark and was like a tree person. So green is actually the original color that's associated with the adversary or, the dark figure.
Damn. My grandma used to always say green must be God's favorite color because it's everywhere.
It's everywhere. Which, we know that the dark side, the evil people, they can't create. They can only manipulate and invert. Well, if green is everywhere on this beautiful planet we have that is a gift from God, would it not make sense that the bad guy would use that as his color, as a personal one finger salute to the person he's fighting against? It kind of makes sense.
Well, I wonder why then is it even in mine, bro? Like, why is it black and red always associated with Satanism and satanic practices? I mean, when I sat down to watch the Jake Paul and Mike Tyson ritual that took place a couple weeks ago, it was all black and red. And I was like, oh, it's going to be a ritual, guys. Why black and red if it's truly green?
I think this comes back to, and the story of Star Wars kind of tells us in a lot of ways, it's the two feuding families. You've got the family that's represented by the snake, and you've got the family that's represented by the eagle. And you see that through multiple cultures through early history. And through the Scythian Empire and the early like Kievan Rus and the Vikings and all the way back to the Proto-Europeans, red was a distinctive color within that culture. We see it on sailing ships of the Vikings. We see it on their uniforms, their heraldry. We see it in their hair color. That are predominantly redheads with green eyes or blondes with blue eyes. We see it across the culture of these people. And either it's been appropriated and put into the lens of anything associated with this is evil, or these are the bad guys, probably because the people they were fighting wanted you to associate that. But we see it across so many elements. The British East India Company has the American flag, and that existed before America. The red and white stripes with the Union Jack in the corner. And then just after the British East India Company started to wane and fall, which country sprang up? The United States, right? And we see it in the hats that these people wear. We see it in the Phoenicians. We see it in the Scythians. We got the red cap, like the gnome's hat, the cap of knowledge, what the French wore in their revolution. This color is associated with rebellion. It's associated with people fighting against like greater powers. It's associated with the earliest dominating powers in human history. And I think it's being done on purpose to either show us who they were, or it's inverting it and making out that they were the bad guys when in reality they could have been the good guys all along.
That's crazy. And so I would not put it past Lucas to absolutely have some sort of occultist backing and just really like thinking about who gets what color lightsaber. For that reason, and only certain people would get it. And thank God we have people like you, Drew.
Unless you get purple, and that's purely just a choice by one of the actors who said, yeah, I want a purple one, supposedly. But then again, purple is the color of royalty, like you said. Just outside of film on that, Luke supposedly only got the green lightsaber because on film cuts on Tatooine, the blue lightsaber wouldn't stand out against the blue sky. So they changed it to green. I'm dubious on that one. I think green is there for a reason. And if you look at the Emperor being an archetype for God and Darth Vader being the archetype for Jesus because he's born without a father like Jesus, he brought balance and harmony. Different way in Star Wars. He fits the archetype of Christ. And then you look at Luke Skywalker as almost the Antichrist, wielding a green lightsaber and killing God, trying to kill God in this analogy. He tries to turn Vader against, essentially who his father was. And if you juxtapose that into being the biblical lens, it's like Satan trying to tempt Christ against God.
That's insane to me. So I don't know. I don't know what to ask after that. I'm just kind of absorbing everything. So if you just want to I'll interrupt you if I have a question, but I'm just
I'll get stuck into the Scythians and why their connection to the Sith. And anyone who's seen Star Wars would know the Sith are the dark version of the Jedi. Same powers, same gear, red lightsabers, the bad version of the good guys. The Scythians were a nomadic people of warriors that existed on the steppe region from 900 BC to 200 BC. They originated roughly in Siberia to the Pontic steppe, which is modern-day Ukraine, which is very interesting considering the Ukraine has this connection with Khazaria and the early Kievan Rus, which the Rus meaning red. So we've got those connections there. But as a culture, they were distinctive because they wore the peaked cap, like that gnome hat that we were talking about earlier. They had horses. They used axes as their primary weapons. They had these shields that were adorned with red. And to the Greeks, they were known for their appearance, which seems very strange for the modern-day populations of that region. You would think that people of that steppe, Southeastern Asian region would be very almost Iranic or kind of Sumerian in appearance, maybe a little bit East Asian. But according to the ancient Greeks and the Chinese who fought against them, these people are depicted as Caucasian, green or blue-eyed, and predominantly red-haired. And these are people that sprung up out of nowhere, conquered all the lands around them, constantly attacked, took all their plunder, and then over time were kind of incorporated into other nations and vassal states. But the Scythians, they almost played the role as the Nephilim in the Star Wars universe as the Sith. And I'll get to that as to the background of these characters. So I gave you the idea of the real-world Scythians, a warrior class of people. The Sith in Star Wars weren't originally humans. They were an alien race, which were all red-skinned. So Lucas, in the development of this race, applied the idea of the red Phrygian cap or the gnome cap from the Scythians and gave it to an entire race, red-skinned people. And what do we see in the ancient world from those Proto-Iranic and Proto-Turkic people? Because they were Caucasian, when they did go into the Middle East and North Africa, they had to adorn their skin with a red ochre to protect themselves from the sun. We see that in architecture. We see it in all the artwork of ancient Egypt, red-skinned people. And people today think that's a ruddy complexion more akin to being Arabian, but those populations didn't exist at the time. These were Caucasian people from the steppe who had to protect themselves with that ochre. So he just made this race.
Not far from where I live is where the natives supposedly fought the Redskin giants, which it's like not even 15 miles away from where I live.
Yeah, and you are in a part of America which can be quite hot. So were they really red-skinned, or were they ochre adorned to protect their skin? Especially if we take into the account the biblical accounts of Nephilim, which were tall, larger-than-life men with red hair, generally pale-skinned, but it fits the bill. And the Scythians and the Sith have this real-world connection through the story he's trying to tell. The planet they come from is called Zeost, which is very close to Zion.
Yes.
It's making those connections, right? The world is called Korriban, which in some approaches to Proto-Hebrew means land of the chosen. So we've got these connections. He's telling this very biblical, or at very least, Middle Eastern Levant history through his stories and characters.
Even the spinoff, what is it? Mel Brooks film. What is that called?
Oh my gosh, what is
Spaceballs? Yes, even in Spaceballs, they kind of told you that because their planet was called Druidia.
Yeah,
and they were Druish.
Yep. Which ironically is a takeoff the Druze religion, Drewz or Druez. There's it's an offshoot of Abrahamic religions where they're almost a mix between Christians and Muslims. And they've got a very different take, and they link very closely to Zoroastrianism. A lot of theologists and the esoteric think that that's the true Abrahamic faith. I'm on the fence about it. They have some great takes on history for sure, but the Druish and what Mel Brooks was trying to tell us, very on the nose.
Bro, we're going to have you back on just for that, because that is an interesting topic. Do you think that you and I are we have blood of Nephilim because of like the red hair backing and stuff like that?
Well, this is the thing. We know that the dark side of that exists in this realm. They either invert or change stories. And as a Christian and coming to Christianity later in life, I have this basis of academia, science, common sense, logic that forms a lot of my foundations. And as a conspiracy theorist, I look at the Bible and I question aspects of it. And I'll pray on it and I'll ask for guidance on it. But there's many aspects, particularly of the Torah and the Old Testament, that I question whether the roles have been inverted. And sometimes I think, and I've had some commentary from mates that say, you're just a redhead supremacist, you're a ginger supremacist. But I wonder, we're such a small population of the world, we have a higher affinity for Rh negative. Now, are these fallen angel bloodlines? Could we be in the Nephilim? Very possible. But then on the other side, maybe it's possible that the 10 missing tribes, the people who went into Europe and then ultimately to America and the rest of the Anglosphere, maybe those are the true Hebrews. And we were called the Nephilim, which simply just means men of renown, because when we came on the scene, we outcompeted everyone, and we had this grace of God and a backing of God to achieve all the things that the early Proto-Europeans did. And the people that lost out in that clash of cultures, maybe they wrote themselves into a story that made them the victims and repurposed the word Nephilim to being the bad guys. It's a very controversial take for a Christian to suggest that, but the historical sense of this would suggest that that's maybe the case. The inversion of Nephilim, Scythians, Proto-Europeans. A lot of people are kind of leaning into that realm of things, especially if they have a background in history and cultural shift.
Have you read the books of Enoch?
I have, and this is the thing that makes me wonder, because these were deliberately left out. So like the Dead Sea Scrolls, the church knew about these. The Holy Roman Empire, the Orthodox Church, they had this knowledge at their disposal. It wasn't something that was just found in the Dead Sea and then found out. This is knowledge that was already existed. The Ethiopian Bible had this in its canon, so it's clearly known about. So why were these left out? Even within the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's tales of not all the Nephilim being evil, and that Abraham's tribe, the tribe of Abraham, the Hebrews, they offer the olive branch to some of these people. If you renounce, your lineage, the dark side, your father, the people who created you, you can attain heaven. You can get there. And for whatever reason, they chose not to. But over tens of thousands of years, possibly hundreds of thousands of years of cultural shift from an oral language to meaning of words changing, to dialectics changing, to translations, to things deliberately being pulled out, to things being deliberately added in, you have to wonder, is the core of the story of the Old Testament true and factual? And this is the one thing of biblical scripture that I wrestle with all the time. I have a feeling and a knowing in myself that Christ and the story of Christ is inherently true, because there's so much against it. Yet there doesn't seem to be much pushback on the Old Testament. Everyone just seems to go along with it because it's the first in the canon, and then Jesus is kind of the afterthought, which is an odd thought for Christians, because really Christ should be the focus and the center of everything that you put your faith in.
You're good friends with the guys over at Operation Red Pill, right? Have you run this by them, and what's their take?
I've kind of tiptoed around it on the Christian Conspiracy Coalition. I'm the person that I think it helps that I'm a bit more conspiratorial and new to the church, because I'll ask these questions that I find a lot of people just tend to ask. The common sense approach of, if God is truly a loving, omnipotent God, why did he ask for the deaths of so many people in the Old Testament? Why did he do this? Why did he do that? And you'll get a lot of great pushback, or a lot of great referencing to, this is because the bloodlines would need to be wiped out. The Nephilim existed, and they had to destroy what was left of the corrupted bloodlines. It makes sense, but at the same time, the logical reasoning aspect of my mind, which isn't inherently spiritual or biblical, kind of makes me question the other train of thought on that.
Yeah, I have a hard time wrestling with a lot of things as well. I am Christian leaning. I don't pray as much as I should, and I hopefully have created more Christians from this show, but I'm not practicing like I should be. But I wrestle with so many things as well, because if we live in Satan's world and he's showing us what we're allowed to and want to see, then how do we know that he's not giving us this God and this Jesus that we're worshiping, and we could be actually worshiping a false idol in that way without truly knowing it? Because we know that a lot of these religions were created through organizations like the Rockefellers and stuff like that. So it makes me wonder, if these people are evil and like esoteric and occultic, then, and they create these things, like my parents are Jehovah's Witnesses, and I tried to tell them, like, you know who created that, right? And they're like, oh, you're out of your mind. But I'm not out of my mind. And these people are evil. So they're making you worship Jesus, and I agree with that. But are they tricking us?
Yeah, and I think these are the good types of questions even the most devout Christian should ask and pray and use their discernment on. And you look at, say, the real battleground of spiritual warfare, where we see possession and people being corrupted by demonic possession and infestation, the word of Christ or Yeshua drives these things away. They are absolutely terrified of it. I barely hear of any types of sessions in which a demon is expelled by using the name Yahweh, for example. Now, if that's the true name of God, it doesn't seem to hold much weight when it comes to exorcisms. It's the name of Christ or Yeshua that seems to have that power. Is that all intention-based and you're driving the intention on the word Christ or on the word Yeshua? Could be, but I don't hear a lot of these types of things happening with the word Yahweh.
Well, maybe I'll give a little pushback on that. And I was just thinking this possibly could be because when we pray, we have to pray through Jesus, right? Like he's the middleman. So it could possibly be that you're calling out to expel these demons, and they're like, you can't talk to God directly. You got to use Jesus.
Yeah, you've got to go through the hierarchy of control. You just can't call the manager straight away.
Yeah,
it's your system manager's job. Yeah, absolutely. That could be the case. But you're so right. There's so much in this world we don't understand that I think you have to question everything. And Ghost has said this many times. He references, I believe it was one of the American founding fathers, you should even question the existence of God. And I think God will show you the path and the way on that. But we're humans. We're given this curiosity and the ability to question for a reason. And I think we have to use that with our discernment, logic, reason, and faith to find our path in life. Does it mean all Christians are going to agree? No. But I think that's an individual path for everyone they have to take.
Yeah. The Force. So there was a quote that I used to say, and I don't know who it was. It was just some random thing that I saw on Instagram, and it was this lady, and she said, witchcraft, magic, prayer, and manifestation. She was like, it's called something different in every aspect of or walk of life, but nobody denies existence. And I think that is what the Force is within this whole saga.
Yeah, witchcraft, magic, prayer, we're all describing the same thing. We're just arguing about the origin of it. And
yes.
I think that's true in a lot. That's the spirit. That's spiritual warfare. There are aspects of things that the Bible tells us we shouldn't indulge in, but it doesn't mean those things aren't capable of being used. And I think it's, if you're using the wrong approach or the wrong types of things, that's where corruptions can occur. And this is the Force to a T. There's aspects of the Force that the Jedi use and they don't use because it's the path of the dark side. And there's aspects that the Sith use that the Jedi won't use, vice versa. So it's the dialectic of you're in group A, you're in group B. There's the division that you see in everything. And I think a lot of the esoteric schools of thought on this, they try to take away all the borders, all the boundaries, and have it in one pie, and think that if it's knowledge, it's access that everyone should have to it. And this is where you get into the Gnostic beliefs, and you see that kind of pushed into Star Wars a little bit. But the Force is something that's definitely kind of given up as something that everyone has the ability to attain. And they did that very early on in Star Wars, that everything's binded and tied into the Force. It exists in everything. And then they changed it. They changed it in episode 1. They made it about metachlorians. They made it about bloodlines. They made it about people who had a certain high count. Very reminiscent of tracking people's bloodlines via COVID. Very reminiscent of maybe Rh negative bloodlines or certain blood types. They made it about the individual. It wasn't the overall thing that everyone is tied into and binds us together.
Do you, and this is totally off topic, but do you think that they were successful in the COVID DNA grab in finding what it is that they were looking for?
I think it's a combination of things. We had the Human Genome Project that occurred, I think it was 12 or 20 years prior to COVID kicking off. And that was just a mapping of the genome, finding out all the DNA, which is active, which is inactive, which one is considered junk DNA. And I think once they mapped the genome and knew what it's capable of, they tried to find people with certain characteristics in which those things are active still or can be activated easier than others. You throw out something like COVID, where you've got PCR tests out the wazoo, throw into that 20 years of 23andMe and Ancestry Online, it gives a really big data bank of possible bloodlines that maybe the elites are trying to target. if we think this is in the lens of, say, the Nephilim, and the Nephilim have bred themselves into looking quasi-human yet retain some of their knowledge and abilities, if they tried to get back to their original state, their physical presence of being demigods and being giants, the only way they could do that was by piecing all the pieces back together again. We see this in genetics. We saw the Third Reich bring back the Uruk bull, which was an ancient type of bison that existed in Europe. The Nazis selectively bred it back into existence by using cattle of the region. That was just through selective breeding. You throw into that CRISPR DNA technology, mRNA, they could literally inject this stuff into people and grow a Nephilim based on what's already in their body. We've had Elon Musk come out and say, mRNA is such a good technology, you could turn a human being into a butterfly. And I don't think he's lying on that.
That's insane to me, bro. So if it is truly like the times of Noah in the end times, then we are there. Like, we're there. There's no denying it, right? But
yeah, it's all around us.
But there are some things that still have to happen, right? Not everything has met its quota to say, I would say, before everything has to take place. I don't know. I think we'll see it in our lifetime. What do you think?
It's a funny question, because I think every major generation has, of Christianity at least, and to an extent Judaism, they have thought they are living in the end times, and they link what's happening biblically with the world around them, because that's what we do. We look for signs. We look for signs of the end times, and we try to apply it to our context of the world. I think we're closer than we ever have been. There's a lot happening in the world that could put us at the very cusp of tribulation or mid-tribulation, but we don't know how long that goes for. The tribulation could last for 300 to 400 years. We don't know. There's no defined timeline on this thing. I think what we're seeing with the state of Israel being brought back, it's certainly, I think that started the timeline. It definitely got the ball rolling. So we're probably a good start.
It really scares me, but in the Bible, it talks about Israel, but I think that Israel is a place in people's hearts, not necessarily a plot of land. Do you think that they're just like trying to fast forward to purposely fulfill Bible prophecy? And who would be doing this?
Yeah, well, it's using it like a playbook, isn't it? From the Bible, we know Israel is a name that was given to a man, and Israel is meant to be the church, the people who are amongst the faith. To subjugate that and turn it into something, a bastardized version, make it a nation state, make it about ethnogenocide of the people that surround it, that's really slapping a face of God who gave that name. And the purpose of which you can see happening now. We've had nearly 100,000 people killed in a short period of time. We're seeing daily bombings that if it was the Americans, the UN would be up in arms about it, but it's taken a very long time for the institutions in the world to notice this. It's a wild time to be alive, my friend, wild time.
I mean, it is the Americans. Where do you think all this funding is coming from? Through back doors? I mean, Netanyahu said, we have the backing of the United States. The question is, what are we going to do with it?
Well, yeah, I think you have to really pull apart. Is it the Americans, or is it the state of America, or the military industrial complex? You're an American. I know you're not dropping bombs. A lot of my friends are Americans. We have to differentiate the idea of the American state versus the American people. There are a lot of Americans who support Zionism. There's a lot of Zionist Americans, but then again, there's a lot of Americans who are against the wholesale slaughter of children. I think the most common people would be. It doesn't matter what side of politics or what side of this argument you sit on. You don't want to see innocents killed. And I would almost flip it as, it's not America doing it, it's America's master. And there's a lot of influence within American politics and corporations that come from Zionism and the state of Israel. And that's not to throw a curveball or to slight the Jewish people at all. We know that there's small elements within every creed, religion, group, culture, nation. Unfortunately, people at the top of some of these groups are the most nefarious, evil people we've ever seen. And if they have a huge influence over a state like America, which has the largest military, the best gear in the world, they've got a pretty good attack dog.
They got the best attack dog. And the scary thing is they also have propaganda backing them. And especially in the United States, I don't know how it is out there in Australia, Drew, but these old school value Christians are behind Israel. Like, they will not see what they're doing as anything evil. It's just it's bred within them or something, that it's we have to stand behind Israel no matter what. And it's like, guys, like, that's not Israel. Like, that's just not Israel.
And it's a funny inversion of God's chosen people as well, because if they're true Christians, they would know that through the New Testament that we are all God's chosen people now. If you bend the knee and you follow Christ, you are the chosen people. We were grafted onto the tree. We are a part of the tribe now. We're a part of Abraham's family because we have been grafted in. There is no singular chosen people anymore, and the New Testament's very clear about that. So a lot of these Zionists, you see, they put more faith and more power into the Old Testament for its ability to preempt end times through Noahide laws, through the Moses type of accords, that they think that's going to get them to salvation quicker than it would be to wait for God's timeline.
With if the Bible is true, then we know that the bad guys are at one point going to win, and we will be living under a one world government for a while, and that hasn't taken place yet. And I'm not so sure that that's going to happen under Trump's agenda. I think I discussed. Did I discuss this with one of my recent guests? I just discussed this, that he's too cocky. Like, he thinks too highly of himself to leave America in a bad state. And so I don't think he's just going to hand it over. I think he is going to want to shine as the best president that the United States has ever seen.
Oh yeah, and his ego, and it's probably some of his good qualities that as an individual have got him the success he has. But I think Trump, you're very right, is going to be very centralized, very introverted as America. America's not going to be the world presence it used to be for the beginning of it. Trump's probably going to be known as the great peacemaker. He's going to try and end wars very quickly. He's going to re-kick the American economy. He's going to change the world economy via association. And I think out of that peace, that's where we're going to see the true world government type to start to emerge. We've kind of been brainwashed into this 1984 Orwellian idea that the UN's going to take over, and then it's going to be the European Union, then a North American Union. It's going to be very left-wing authoritarian. I have a feeling that because so much of that has been pushed onto us so quickly, the natural pendulum swing or fourth turning correction to that is going to bring about some very, very hardcore conservative approach to one world government. And it's going to be very authoritarian. It's going to be very biblically driven by Old Testament, which in essence would make it very Zionistic. And I think that's why you're going to see Christians with their heads cut off. Christians who disagree with the majority of the church and their position are going to be targeted very harshly. And we can see that happening. Trump's a big supporter of anti-Semitism laws, but we're seeing these laws ramp up across the West, where open hatred towards any given people is a terrible thing, I agree. But the way these laws are being written and brought in is any kind of criticism is seen as anti-Semitism in these new laws across the West, which is a dangerous position to be, because you should be able to openly criticize a nation or a government's policies if they are terrible policies. These are just common things of free speech that even in a country that has it enshrined in your constitution, we're starting to see these elements be brought in to a degree that are at least trying to limit your freedom of speech.
Yeah, and I don't see how these people that are so hard at backing Trump, and don't get me wrong, the other person that could have won, that would have been way worse for us. But these people that are hardcore Trump should be very hardcore 1A. And, that's infringing on 1A. If he's going to say that anything spoken is against the Jewish people or the Zionists is anti-Semitic, then that's a huge problem, because that's just the beginning of being able to control what you can or can't say, because that's a very slippery slope. Who is anyone else to deem what speech is actual hate and what isn't, right? If we're trying to convey something that is factual and you don't like the facts that I'm bringing and you're like, that's anti-Semitic. Well, fuck, dude. Seriously? We do actually kind of deal with that in a way right now. If we talk any criticism about what we're told about the Holocaust in any way, shape, or form, or anti-Semitic. And we all know that history is fabricated. And so, everything else we can question, but not that one event.
And look, don't get me wrong. I've copped a lot of flack from some of my listeners recently for my position on Trump. I'm not someone who has Trump derangement syndrome. It's ironic because it exists on a spectrum. You've got the purple-haired weirdos that freak out because he got in, and then you've got the people who are so devout to him they think he's a coming messiah. I'm critical on Trump by his actions, and I agree with you. If laughing Kamala Harris had got in, we would be on a bullet train into a dystopian nightmare of socialism across the West. No ifs or buts about it. With Trump, we're getting there via a different direction, and we're probably going on a slow-moving locomotive that's going to have a nice, relaxed minibar, and we won't know what's happening. We'll have the food, we'll have the service, we'll have these wonderful things going, and we won't realize we're heading there until it's too late.
Yeah, and I don't think it's going to be 2025. I don't know what this whole uproar about it is. Have you ever looked in, and I just brought this up on one of my last shows, but have you ever looked into 2045.com?
No, I've read Deagle with the date of 2025, but not the 45 one.
Okay, so the 2045 agenda is basically making everybody transhuman by 2045. And that we can tie a little bit into Star Wars, I guess, as I'm trying to reel this back into Star Wars. But we kind of see that happening right now as well with the droids and stuff like that, where we're seeing that become more part of our everyday lives. You can't walk around. People don't write down directions anymore. It's right there in your pocket. Our teachers said that we wouldn't have a calculator in our pocket at all times. Well, little do they know. I was just trying to tie this back in with Star Wars.
Well, essentially, we're all androids already, right? We just carry our computer in our pocket. It's not built into us. But we do have a champion who wants to integrate this type of technology into our brains, and that's Elon Musk. He's got the funding and the backing and the ingenuity to do it. He wants to bring in Neuralink, which can be seen as a different part of your brain, which would be almost like a sub-base operating system. Now, the question is it up to us to control that operating system, or can someone else remotely hack it? That's going to be an issue. If someone who has unknown amount of satellites supposedly in the sky, man who has a control of the internet in a lot of aspects, has this jacked into our brains, what's to stop us all from becoming some kind of collective legion, like we hear about in demonology, the legion of demons, a host that inhabit all bodies at one time? Sounds a lot like Neuralink.
Yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like. And it's not a question, bro. If anything is online, it's hackable. Elon Musk has his cars hacked all the time. So why would you put anything in your body that can be hackable, especially in your brain, right? And so that right there, it's dead in the water to me. There is no way that that's ever going to happen on my own, free will. And man, I remember you, that just made me remember you were the one that had to get jabbed, and you said, I'm doing this under duress, right?
Yeah.
So anything ever happen with that? Because I know like here in the United States, a lot of people are getting back pay, stuff like that, from being fired. Is there any kind of repercussions for these people for doing this to you?
Not in this state. Legally, they had emergency powers, which their court systems in this country will always back. We're a Westminster system of parliament in which, there is no real pushback from the common person. What the state says essentially goes. There's been attempted lawsuits and things that have gone on that have been pretty well thrown out of court. I think it's going to take time for the Commonwealth countries. In America, you've got the Constitution to give you some backing on that. And as more and more evidence comes out for the dangers of these things and the potential health impacts, and even the bare minimum of people were coerced into doing something against their bodily autonomy, until that's fully realized, you won't see a lot of change in this country or any other Commonwealth nations.
And what sucks is people were cheerleading it like they were over here. And we can definitely tie that into Star Wars, because there is a scene where who was going to be my future wife until I found out she was on the Epstein client list, Natalie Portman says, so that's how the Republic falls, with thunderous applause. And I was like, holy crap, that is exactly what we are watching right now. And this was years ago, but these people were cheerleading the demise of their rights.
Yeah, and we have to talk about the background of that one scene. People think the episodes 1, 2, or 3 are slightly boring because it's so politically motivated, but it gives you the perfect analogy for the Hegelian dialectic: problem, reaction, solution. The Emperor, the big bad guy behind the scenes, he instigates a war of which he controls both armies. He throws the galaxy into chaos to the point where he gets them to give him ultimate controlling powers, and they put him in the role of Emperor. He gives them the problem, he gives them the solution, and they hand all the power over to him. We see that happen throughout history. We saw it in COVID. The problem was this virus. The issue was we were locked down, we couldn't leave. What do we need to do? You know what? We need to just do Project Warp Speed and get these things out before the 10 years of studies are done, because we just can't wait that long. And the majority of people were hoodwinked on that alone. And the worst part is there's people who adamantly defend him, saying that, oh, we would have been in lockdowns longer. It was the only way to end the lockdowns. Well, honestly, lockdowns wouldn't have gone any further than 2 years, because people would have been jack of it and they would have done away with it themselves. And it would have been the ultimate show of force and power of the people if we stood up against the state collectively and said no more. Instead, people fell for it. They waited for the vaccine. They were coerced into it like I was. I'll admit that. I'm not someone who shies away from the choice I made. And we're put in those positions. And it's the Hegelian dialectic on a scale and here in history that we can identify with. But Star Wars shows us that. It shows us that nefarious powers control all the mechanisms of power, control left, control right. They give you these problems so that we'll have a reaction, so that they have the solution pre-planned for us.
Sorry, dead silence. I hate that. I was trying to think of another question, but I'm still stuck on the whole the fall of the Republic and people cheering it along. And I don't think that COVID is the only time we've seen that, and the only time we're going to see that again, because 9/11 was almost the same way, where we had this false flag and it was in unison. And I don't know if this was in other countries, but in the United States, bro, we felt like this just, I can't even describe it. The patriotism the day after 9/11 was bigger than anything that I felt as a nation ever. Like, you saw people driving around for weeks with American flags on their cars and everything. And it felt really fucking good until we were like, now we're going to focus our anger at these people who had nothing to do with what happened. And so same thing is the emperor creates these problems and implements a solution. It's like, oh, it's these guys, let's go get them, type of a thing. And ever since then, we've been in a forever war since then.
It took America 20 years to get rid of the Taliban and reinstall the Taliban. Like, talk about a complete waste of human life, time, resources, and energy. Perfect hoodwink, don't get me wrong. The way that the American patriotism was weaponized during that event is astonishing. If the United States so chose to go and unilaterally carpet bomb the Middle East with nukes at that time, the majority of Americans would have supported it without having any other information or details on the situation. They would have just gone in purely based on the emotions, the trauma of the time.
It was the most successful psychological operation on the American people at that one time, because what it did is it took a traumatic experience that everybody had to go through at one time. It was just like boom, 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 happened to us all at once, where everybody was confused. And then they put on the television what they needed us to know and needed us to see, like dancing people, the Bin Laden family having parades and everything and shit like that, and infuriating the American people. And if there was ever a time to broadcast, to cast a spell, broadcast, that was the greatest accomplishment, I think, of these sorcerers.
It's the first time they ever really projected so much damage, death, turmoil, all on live television, all around the world at the same time. Even till today, we haven't seen an event of that scale. And it surprises me as to why they haven't done it. You could argue the event that we saw that prolonged over COVID, like everyone got up for their 11 a.m. press conferences to know how fucked we were because of COVID, or how much danger we're in, and how many death counts and how many numbers where there were. We haven't seen a huge massive traumatic event like that. And I think that's the only way they'll be able to do it post-COVID, because a lot of people have wised up to the slow drip effect of the tyranny that governments can install via fear. So it has to be something so big and so overwhelming, it will even deter the most attuned people from realizing it's a psyop.
It would have to be a faked military invasion at this point, I think, because in order for them to, I think that the average, not average, but I would say that at least 1 out of 5 people in America are able to tell you what a false flag is. And that alone is too many people for them to be able to pull off something like 9/11 again. I think they would literally have to have soldiers, and like they were going to do with Kennedy, right? It would have to be something on that effect. And what's scary is Hibbler thinks that Trump is going to allow one of these false flags to take place during his presidency.
Well, yeah, it would secure power and more support from across the board of people he doesn't traditionally have. And even say people who do support him yet are critical of his position and are more nuanced in his approach, those people would fall in line very quickly. We see that in the story of Star Wars when, through The Mandalorian, which is the later series, they reference the destruction of the first Death Star, and this Imperial pilot mentions, "I'll do anything to stand in the way of terrorism. You were responsible for destroying the Death Star. There were tens of millions of my people on that battle station, and you're responsible." So it gives like almost like this reference to, if something so big and so traumatic occurs, people will be blinded by that alone and will do anything in the name of doing the right thing. And that's what the Imperials in Star Wars are all about. They're made out in the movies to be these heartless, evil people, but through the comic books and the television series and the novelizations, we find out that these are just like everyday people who have been fed a certain amount of propaganda, a certain amount of systemic trauma, that they think they are generally the good guys fighting against the terrorists, which is the rebellion.
And I've noticed that they did this in older movies, and the very first movie to do this was Saving Private Ryan, and it was giving a face and a heart to the enemy. Most times you were watching a movie, it was a faceless enemy. You weren't attached to that enemy. And not saying that Star Wars doesn't have enemies that you get to know and other movies don't. But I mean, the majority of people that you see shot in these movies are stormtroopers. Their faces are covered. They all look the same. They're hitting a plastic piece. You're not seeing blood type of a thing. They're not real people until, and like I said, in Saving Private Ryan, movies started giving a face to the enemy. And so I'm curious to watch. Is it worth it watching The Mandalorian? What should I watch if I've only seen movies?
I'd start with The Mandalorian. You have to make sure you've watched the original series first, 4, 5, and 6, and then just watch The Mandalorian. It gives you a really good indication of what's happened to the Star Wars universe after the fact. And you've got these pockets of the Empire trying to survive after the Emperor's being killed. And for the most part, they all think they're doing the right thing. They're trying to maintain the Empire. Ironically mirrors the Anglo-American Empire right now. For a lot of economists and a lot of world historians would view the American Empire on its last legs. It's got its bases all around the world. It's trying to maintain control in multiple areas. There's growing powers through BRICS and Russia and China. It just needs to wobble a little bit more, and that whole chessboard just falls away. And it shows that really well in The Mandalorian, that there's this new growing democracy of the Republic is building and growing, and they're going out and they're fighting the bad guys and they're doing the right things. But you see the face of those, what used to be nameless characters. You see people of the Empire. You find people who were fighting against the rebellion and they either turn to the good side or what have you. You get to see a face of the common man. And that in itself is a psychological operation. It almost puts into the mindset of, in the past, it would be you fight the faceless, nameless corporations, or you fight the faceless, nameless dictatorships. They don't count. They're not really human. If it puts it in the scope of it could be your neighbor, it puts it in a situation where if something does happen, oh, geez, my neighbor was having friends around during COVID and being noisy. I'm going to dob them in. They've got a name and a face now. Oh, yeah, that friend who has that podcast who says things I don't like, I'm going to dox them and get their job taken away from them. It allows you to target people you know and others them at the same time. It puts a face of someone you know into the stormtrooper uniform and allows you to shoot them because then there's no consequences of it. They're a stormtrooper now. They've just got the name for you.
Did you just freestyle that?
Yeah.
That was great. That was awesome, bro. So I would say that overall, Star Wars is not evil. It just tells a story of good and evil. And if you're smart, like Drew Misson over here, you can read between the lines and tie it into things throughout history, throughout the Bible, and maybe some foretelling of the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we see the Empire collapse in Star Wars, and the Anglo-American Empire is, 50 years overdue for a collapse compared to other empires of historical precedence. You know, we've seen a lot of pump and dumps of money into the American economy to keep it alive. The United States and collectively the West is kind of on life support at the moment, and someone just has to pull the plug, and then who knows what kind of anarchy will happen. And what we will do as people in a collapsing empire, will we do things outside of the norm because we think we're trying to keep the comfortability and the lifestyle we've grown up with alive, and what evils will we do to try and keep it that way?
I love it. Drew, I wish I had more time, but I only have this much time. I hear a lot of things going on out there I need to go check on. Damn it, I'm fucking up all over tonight. I don't know why, but you speak. I was just talking to Trebles about this earlier, and it was like, you speak so well. And I brought up the Red Pill guys, and I was like, you're the only one that can go on there and sound like you're on the same playing field as them, like just because of the way that they speak. It's almost intimidating, and you have that about you as well.
That's big props, because those guys, they have a very polished show and such a wealth of knowledge that it is hard to stay in the same playing field with those guys. So thanks for the compliment.
Absolutely, brother. So I would like to get your take maybe as like Star Wars as a whole, and then I'll let you go ahead and plug away before you get out of here.
Yeah, Star Wars as a whole is a traditional tale of light versus dark, but it goes a little bit deeper. It gives you the nuance of the gray areas in the world. And if you look very closely, you can see that there is no good, there is no evil, there's only perspective. And the Sith, as the bad guys in that entire genre of films, they say that. They say that there is no love without hate. There is no darkness without light. And they toe the line of being the good guys who are doing bad things to maintain power. And I think this is a story Star Wars tells us, is that even the most well-intended common person can be manipulated into doing things they don't realize that they're doing.
Damn, I love it, brother. So it makes me feel a little better that I'm not partaking in a satanic ritual when I watch Star Wars. So I feel a little better about that. I am definitely going to try to rewatch them through a different lens. And can you tell everybody where they can go find your breakdowns? Because I know you get probably way more in depth on your own shows.
Yeah. So Conspiracy Theater 3000, you can find that on majority of regular streaming places. If you're not there, it does appear on my own feed under your Missing the Point podcast. I'll also get around quite a bit. I collaborate with other content creators. Julia, the Cosmic Peach, and I, we do some breakdown shakedowns together of our favorite films growing up. The boys over at Operation Red Pill, we've gone through Star Wars, Avatar, a couple of the big line films. I am a cinemaphile. I love watching cinema because they're stories that help us connect with the ancient past that we've somehow forgotten. We've got collective amnesia as a species, not just for the history that was lost or the technology, but the lived experiences. And I think cinema is that kind of it's the window being open to telling us a greater story that we all inherently know.
Yeah, I love cinema, and it's always been something that I go to escape my reality, you know? And so it's always going to be that part of me. I would love to make it myself, maybe just, but you know, I don't have millions of dollars or whatever. Bro, I love the breakdown shakedowns that you do with Julia, and I did put it in her ear, and I'm hoping one of these days I hear a Monster Squad breakdown shakedown. I don't know if there's anything in that movie, but that was one of my favorite movies growing up, and I never hear anybody talk about that movie.
What a cult classic.
Yes, isn't it?
There's got to be something in that for sure.
Definitely.
It's on my radar now. Thank you.
Heck yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and live link everything down below. So if you guys are watching or listening in the Podverse, go ahead and scroll down right now. And while you're scrolling down, go ahead and give a 5-star right before you click on one of Drew's links. It's going to say everything Drew missing right there. And I'll have all of his links. You see it right there. You see it? Go ahead, click it and give him a follow. Give him a 5-star. Drew, your research is second to none. I love the way that you put everything together and present it. You're a wealth of knowledge, and I am just happy that we have you out there in the world, brother. Thank you so much for coming on White Rabbit. Is there any last words you would like to leave the Conspiracy Junkies with?
No, thank you for having me on. It's been far too long between drinks, my friend, and I look forward to having more chats with you in the future. We've got, just in today, we went all around the gamut of conspiracies like we usually do. We tried to stick to Star Wars. We tied in everything, which is, it's involved in the film series, but we definitely could have gone deeper in other areas. So I hope to catch up with you again.
You definitely will catch up, Drew, and we'll talk to you later. Everybody, keep digging down those rabbit holes.
Well, I've read a little bit on the internet and such, that we've been fed a bunch of lies about a lot of stuff. I continue with my research, read everything I can, even listened to a podcast with Katillist and Sam. He said they were actors in a studio in 1969, and the Challenger was staged and passengers were fine. Now you know a little bit about my history. You can throw away your textbooks and just listen to me. I've been across the world, yeah, I've seen it all. We're living on a disc and not a disco ball. Your science mumbo jumbo ain't so matter of fact, 'cause I'm always gonna know that the earth is flat. Now I've got you thinking about everything you've known. Are you yourself or are you really a clone? Don't drink water from the tap, you've got to ionize. For $5,000 I'll sell you a unit. Without it you could die. Ain't got no chip on my shoulder, but you've got one in your arm. You thought it would protect you, but it does you more harm. Don't drink water from the tap, you've got to ionize. For $5,000 I'll sell you a unit. Without it you could die. Ain't got no chip on my shoulder, but you've got one in your arm. You thought it would protect you, but it does you more harm. Look up to the sky and there's danger to see, from chemtrails to electromagnetic 5G. I've been across the world, yeah, I've seen it all. We're living on a disc and not a disco ball. Your science mumbo jumbo ain't so matter of fact, 'cause I'm always gonna know that the earth is flat. So I'm sitting on my porch, scrolling through some reels. A black SUV pulls up, she exits wearing heels. She says her name's Tiffany Gomez and that fuck is not real. That's how they got Aaliyah and Britney's been killed. Well, diddy diddle kids, pay it no mind. Where's the client list? There is nothing that is fine. Well,